You want to know how I destroyed a country music legend and my millionaire stepson in one night, in front of 2,000 people and a live television audience, using nothing but a dead woman's song and a 30-year-old film reel? Simple. My wife left me a secret, and I'm not the kind of man who lets secrets rot. My name's Harlan Brewer. Pops, if you're buying the beer. 6 months ago, my wife Dottie died, and her worthless son Derek, the boy I raised since he was 12, mind you, stood in a lawyer's office and laughed when they read the will. He got the Nashville mansion, the stock portfolio, everything shiny. I got an abandoned drive-in theater outside Lynchburg, a dollar bill, and these exact words from my stepson: "Go live with the rats, old man." So I did. I drove my beat-up Ford to that crumbling theater with nothing but a crowbar and a broken heart. I busted open the projection booth door expecting a place to sleep. Instead, I found Dottie's ghost. A film reel. A handwritten contract. A DNA test. And a truth so explosive it would bring a music icon to his knees and make my stepson weep on stage at the Grand Ole Opry. You think I'm exaggerating? Stick around. This is the story of how a washed-up trucker took back everything they stole from the only woman he ever loved, and had the time of his damn life doing it. Now, let me tell you about the day my life split in half. It started in a lawyer's office that smelled like old carpet and bad decisions. Mrs. Patterson, the attorney, was a nervous little woman with glasses thick as Coke bottles. She kept adjusting them like they might protect her from what was about to happen. Derek sat across from me in a suit that cost more than my first house, tapping on his fancy phone, couldn't even be bothered to look up when his mother's last wishes were read aloud. I'd buried Dottie 3 days earlier. Cancer took her fast, 6 months from diagnosis to the end. I spent every one of those days at her side. Derek visited twice. Twice. And both times he spent more time on his phone than talking to his mother. But I bit my tongue because Dottie loved him, and I loved Dottie, and that was the deal. The will is straightforward, Mrs. Patterson said, her voice trembling slightly. Dorothy Brewer, being of sound mind, hereby bequeaths the Belle-Meade residence, all associated financial accounts, and her full investment portfolio to her son, Derek Vance. Derek looked up from his phone and smiled. Not a grateful smile. The kind of smile a snake gives a mouse. Furthermore, to her husband, Harlan Brewer, she leaves the property known as the Starlight Drive-In, located outside Lynchburg, Tennessee, and the sum of $1. Silence. The kind of silence that roars. Derek started laughing. Not a chuckle. A full, head-back laugh like he'd just heard the funniest joke of his life. A drive-in theater? Oh, that's perfect. That's absolutely perfect. He stood up, buttoned his jacket, and looked at me like I was something stuck to his shoe. Mom finally figured out your value, old man. $1 and a rotting piece of land. I'd say she overpaid. Mrs. Patterson looked like she wanted to crawl under her desk. I just sat there, letting the words sink in. $1. The woman I'd loved for 30 years left me $1. But here's the thing, I knew Dottie better than anyone. And something about this smelled worse than week-old fish. Dottie wasn't cruel. She wasn't petty. The woman used to cry at Folgers commercials. She wouldn't humiliate me from the grave unless something was very, very wrong. You have until Friday to vacate the Belle-Meade property, Derek said, sliding a set of keys across the table. I've already got a buyer lined up. 7 figures. Don't worry, I'll make sure the new owners don't turn your rose garden into a dog run. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. Oh, and Pops? Go live with the rats. You'll fit right in. The door clicked shut behind him. Mrs. Patterson wouldn't meet my eyes. I'm sorry, Mr. Brewer, she whispered. She changed the will 3 weeks before she passed. I advised against it, but she insisted. She said she had no choice. No choice. Those two words got their hooks in me and wouldn't let go. Dottie, on her deathbed, making changes to her will with Derek hovering nearby. Derek, who'd suddenly developed an interest in his dying mother after years of barely speaking to her. Derek, who'd brought a lawyer to the hospital. The same lawyer who prepared the new will. I drove home, except it wasn't my home anymore, and started packing. 2 duffel bags. My toolbox. A coffee can full of quarters. Dottie's picture in that cheap brass frame we bought at a truck stop in Albuquerque in '76. The frame was tarnished, but the photo inside was still bright. Dottie, 30 years younger, squinting into the desert sun, laughing at something I'd said. Best day of my life, that was. We'd broken down on the interstate and had to wait 6 hours for a tow, and she made it feel like an adventure. She made everything feel like an adventure. I threw my bags in the cab of my '72 Ford F-100, a truck almost as old as my marriage and a lot more reliable, and pointed the hood toward Lynchburg. 2 hours east, past Nashville, into the rolling hills of Moore County. I didn't know what I'd find there. Dottie mentioned the drive-in exactly twice in 30 years. Once when we were dating, when she said she'd bought some land as an investment when she was young. And once, a few months before she died, when she told me, out of nowhere, if anything ever happens, Harlan, go to the drive-in. Everything important is there. I thought she was talking crazy. Cancer does that. It scrambles the brain along with everything else. But I remembered those words now, and they were the only thing keeping me from driving my truck straight into the Tennessee River. The Starlight Drive-In announced itself with a sign that looked like it had survived a war. Half the letters were missing, so it just said STRLIHTDRIEI. The marquee out front had collapsed years ago, judging by the rust. Speaker poles leaned at drunken angles, their little metal boxes long since stripped by scavengers. The screen tower, the big white wall where movies used to play, had a hole in it the size of a Buick. Weeds had swallowed everything. The concession stand's roof was caved in. The ticket booth had a family of raccoons living in it. I sat in my truck and stared at my inheritance. $1 and a postcard from the apocalypse. You should have just hit me, Dottie, I muttered. Would have been kinder. But I'm not the type to sit and feel sorry for myself. 30 years in the Navy and 20 more hauling freight across 48 states teaches you to deal with what's in front of you. What was in front of me was a collapsed drive-in and a dying son. I grabbed my crowbar from behind the seat, a trucker never goes anywhere without a crowbar, and my flashlight, and headed for the projection booth. It was the only building that still had 4 walls and a roof, and I wasn't sleeping in the truck. The projection booth was a 2-story concrete block, squat and ugly, built like a bunker. The steel door at ground level was rusted shut. I wedged my crowbar into the gap and leaned on it with everything I had. 220 pounds of retired trucker, plus 30 years of Navy grit. The door screamed. The rusted hinges gave way with a sound like bones breaking. I stumbled inside, flashlight swinging. First floor was a concession area. Broken glass crunched under my boots. An ancient popcorn machine sat in the corner, its glass case shattered. A faded poster for a John Wayne movie, True Grit, the original, hung crooked on the wall, the Duke's face half peeled away. I found the stairs in back, narrow and steep, concrete steps worn smooth by thousands of feet that hadn't been here in decades. The projection room was a time capsule. 2 enormous 35mm projectors sat side by side like sleeping dinosaurs, covered in a layer of gray dust so thick it looked like fur. A big viewing window faced out toward the ruined screen. Control panels lined the wall, switches and dials that hadn't been touched since before Derek was born. A rolling chair sat in the middle of it all, its vinyl seat cracked and leaking stuffing. I was exhausted. Bone-tired. The kind of tired that settles in your soul. I figured I'd clear a spot on the floor, roll up my jacket for a pillow, and deal with everything tomorrow. But as I swept my flashlight around one last time, the beam caught something odd. A small metal door set into the wall behind the second projector, painted the same gray as the concrete. It was a cupboard, maybe 2 feet square, held shut by a tiny brass padlock. Now, a tiny padlock on a hidden cupboard in a building that's been abandoned for 30 years, that's not something a tired man ignores. That's something a tired man gets curious about real fast. My crowbar made short work of it. The lock popped off and skittered across the floor. I opened the little door, reached inside, and pulled out a metal box. Olive green, military surplus, about the size of a shoebox. It had weight to it. I carried it to the projectionist's chair, sat down, and took a breath. The box wasn't locked. The lid lifted easily, and the first thing that hit me was her smell. White Shoulders perfume. Dottie's perfume. The one she wore on our anniversary every single year. I hadn't smelled it since she got too sick to wear perfume, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. I sat there for a full minute, just breathing her in. Then I looked inside. 2 things. A film reel in a round metal canister, and a thick manila envelope, yellowed with age. The canister had a label on the side, handwritten in black grease pencil. Dottie's handwriting. I'd know it anywhere. She had this loopy way of writing her D's, like little spirals. For my Harlan. If I'm not here to tell you, let me show you. Always, Dot. 1970. My hand started shaking. That was 2 years before I met her. 2 years before a shy waitress at a Nashville honky-tonk caught my eye and changed my life. She never talked much about those years. Said it was a bad time, a time she'd rather forget. I never pushed. When a woman like Dottie chooses you, you don't ask questions. You just thank God and try to deserve her. I set the film canister aside and opened the envelope. The first thing that slid out was a legal document, typed on onionskin paper so thin I could see my hand through it. The letterhead said Lanier and Hart, Music Publishing, Nashville, Tennessee. Dated August 12, 1970. It was a songwriter's contract, and it assigned full ownership and all future royalties for an original song titled Tennessee Midnight to one Dorothy Mae Spencer. My Dottie's maiden name. I read it 3 times. 4 times. The words didn't change. According to this contract, my wife, my quiet, shy wife who hummed in the kitchen and never sang in public, wrote Tennessee Midnight. That song was a monster. Number 1 on the country charts for 6 weeks in 1971. Covered by a dozen artists. Played at every honky-tonk, every wedding, every bar with a jukebox between here and California. And the man who got all the credit, all the money, all the fame, his name was on the co-writer line. Buck Lanier. Buck Lanier built a 40-year career on that song. He had his face in the Country Music Hall of Fame. He had a star on the Walk of Fame. He had mansions and tour buses and platinum records on every wall. And according to this contract, it wasn't his song. It was Dottie's. She wrote it. He stole it and put his name on it. I was still trying to process that when the second thing fell out of the envelope. A small card, the kind hospitals give new mothers, with a tiny blue footprint on it. Baby boy Spencer. Born November 2, 1970. Mother, Dorothy Spencer. Father, unknown. Clipped to the card was a handwritten note. Dottie's writing, but shakier, like she'd been crying when she wrote it. Harlan, I swear on everything holy I was going to tell you. Buck is Derek's father. When I got pregnant, he told me he'd destroy me if I ever told anyone. He said he'd tell everyone I was crazy, that I'd forged the contract, that I'd slept around. I was 19 years old and terrified. I ran. Then I met you, and you gave me a life. A real life. A son. Please forgive me for keeping this from you. I chose you. I always chose you. I dropped the note. My hands were trembling too hard to hold anything. Derek wasn't my stepson. He wasn't my blood, but I'd raised him since he was 12 years old. I taught him to throw a baseball. I taught him to drive a stick shift. I stayed up nights worrying about him when he was a stupid teenager sneaking out windows. And all along, he was the son of the man who destroyed my wife's dream. But there was more. At the bottom of the envelope was a third paper, this one much newer. Computer printed, on crisp white paper. A letter dated 3 weeks before Dottie died. Harlan, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I'm sorrier than I can ever say. Derek found out the truth. He hired some private investigator for a family tree project, that's what he told me, and he found Buck. They've been in contact for years. He came to my hospital room 3 weeks ago with a lawyer and said he'd expose everything unless I signed the house and everything else over to him. He said he'd tell the world I was a liar and a cheater. He said you'd leave me if you knew the truth. I was so weak, Harlan. The medicine made everything foggy. I signed. I'm so sorry. But I hid what matters. The drive-in land is worth over $4 million, a resort developer has been trying to buy it for years. The contract for the song could be worth millions more in back royalties. Everything's in a safe deposit box at First Tennessee Bank in Lynchburg. The key is taped inside the film canister. Please, Harlan. Fight them. For me. For us. You were the best man I ever knew. Don't let them win. I love you forever. Do what's right. Your Dot. I sat in that dusty projection room, holding the last words my wife ever wrote, and I felt something shift inside me. For 6 months, I'd been hollow. A walking shell. Going through the motions of living without actually being alive. But reading that letter, holding that contract, knowing what Derek and Buck had done to her, the grief started turning into something else. Something with teeth. I stood up and walked to the first projector. My hands were steady now. Navy hands. Mechanic's hands. I found the power cord, thick as my thumb, and plugged it into the wall outlet. I said a prayer to whatever God looks after old machines and broken hearts, and threw the main switch. Nothing. Just a faint hum. I waited, holding my breath. Then the lamp flickered, once, twice, and steadied into a warm, golden glow. The old beast was alive. I opened the film canister and, sure enough, a small brass key was taped to the inside of the lid. I pocketed it. Then I lifted out the reel, it was heavy, solid, the film stock thick and professional, and threaded it through the projector sprockets and guides. It took me 3 tries to get it right. I'd never run a projector before, but you don't drive trucks for 20 years without learning how machinery works. When the film was loaded, I aimed the projector at the blank wall beside the viewing window. I wasn't ready to light up the big screen outside. This felt too private, too sacred. I hit the start button, and the room filled with the clatter of spinning reels and the whir of the cooling fan. An image flickered onto the wall, grainy, slightly warped at the edges, but unmistakably real. It was Dottie. Young. Maybe 19 or 20. She wore a yellow sundress and sat on a wooden stool in what looked like a recording studio. An acoustic guitar rested on her knee. Her hair was long and dark, the way it was when I first met her, before the gray came in. Her eyes were bright and terrified and fierce all at once. "Hey, Harlan," she said, and her voice filled the room. Tinny from the old optical soundtrack, but her voice. Her real voice. The one I'd been aching to hear for 6 months. If you're watching this, it means I never got the courage to tell you in person. I made this tape a long time ago, in case something happened to me. I need you to know the truth. She strummed a chord, G major, I'd learn later, not that I knew music, and started to sing. The melody was Tennessee Midnight, but not the version you hear on the radio. Slower. Sadder. A woman singing about a lost night under southern stars, about promises broken and dreams stolen. She looked right into the camera, right into me, and I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. When the verse ended, she stopped playing. That song was mine, Harlan. I wrote it the summer after high school, sitting on the hood of my daddy's truck. Buck Lanier heard me playing it at the Bluebird Cafe and told me I was going to be a star. He was handsome and smooth and I was 19 and stupid. He got me into a studio, recorded a demo, promised me the world. Then he took the master tape, put his name on it, and told me if I ever said a word, he'd bury me. Said he had lawyers and money and connections, and I had nothing. A few months later, I found out I was pregnant. She paused. Wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I ran. I moved to a different part of Nashville, got a job at a diner, and tried to disappear. Then I met you. A big, gruff Navy man with grease under his fingernails and the kindest eyes I'd ever seen. You didn't care about my past. You just cared about me. And when you held baby Derek for the first time, you looked at him like he was the most precious thing in the world. I knew then I'd made the right choice. I chose you, Harlan. I will always choose you. She leaned closer to the camera, and her expression hardened. I'd never seen that look on her face before. It was steel. But now Derek knows. He and Buck have been in contact for years, and Derek wants that land. He found out about the resort deal. He scared me, Harlan. He brought lawyers to my hospital room and told me he'd destroy your reputation along with mine. I was so weak. The medicine, I couldn't think straight. I signed his papers because I was afraid. But the real will, the one I made before I got sick, is in the safe deposit box. The contract is valid. The DNA results from an old test are in there too, proving Buck is Derek's father. You have everything you need to fight them. She picked up her guitar again, strummed a few soft chords. I love you, you stubborn old trucker. I'll love you forever. Now go raise some hell. For both of us. The film ran out. The screen went white, the projector clattering on empty reels. I stood in the sudden silence of that dusty room, the ghost of her voice still echoing off concrete walls, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to cry anymore. I wasn't going to sit in the ruins and feel sorry for myself. My wife had been wronged, deeply, cruelly, systematically wronged, by two men who were supposed to love her. One stole her song. The other terrorized her on her deathbed. And they both thought they'd gotten away with it. They didn't know Harlan Brewer. They didn't know what happens when you push a patient man too far. I packed the film reel back in its canister. I folded the contract, the hospital card, and Dottie's letter, and tucked them into my jacket. I picked up my crowbar and my flashlight and headed down the stairs. Sleep could wait. I had work to do. But first, I needed reinforcements. And I knew exactly where to find them. 17 miles from the drive-in, on a county road most people drive past without noticing, sits a diner called Pearl's Place. It's a squat white building with a neon sign that flickers and a parking lot full of pickup trucks. Pearl herself runs the place, 65 years old, widowed twice, sharp as a tack and twice as tough. She's been serving coffee and advice to truckers and locals for 40 years, and she knew Dottie. Knew her well. They used to sit in the corner booth together and talk for hours, and I never knew what about. Now I had a pretty good idea. I pulled into Pearl's lot just as the dinner rush was winding down. Through the window, I could see her behind the counter, gray hair piled up in a bun, wiping down the formica with a rag in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Moose Delaney was in his usual spot at the counter, a retired mechanic who'd served with me in the Navy, built like a refrigerator and just as subtle. He was the closest thing I had to a brother. Pearl looked up when I walked in, and one glance at my face told her everything she needed to know. She stubbed out her cigarette, poured 3 cups of coffee, and gestured toward the back booth. "Sit down, Harlan. You look like death warmed over." I sat. Moose lumbered over, coffee in hand. "Heard about the will," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Derek's a piece of work. What are you gonna do?" I pulled out the contract, the hospital card, and Dottie's letter, and laid them on the table. "I'm gonna burn their whole damn world down. But I need your help." Pearl picked up the contract and read it slowly, her lips moving. When she finished, she looked at me with fire in her eyes. "That son of a bitch. I knew Dottie wrote something big. She played it for me once, years ago. Made me swear never to tell anyone." She slapped the table. "What do you need?" Moose was already cracking his knuckles. "Just tell me who to hit." I told them about the film. About the safe deposit box. About Buck Lanier and Derek working together. Pearl listened without interrupting, her sharp eyes missing nothing. When I finished, she took a long drag of her cigarette and said, "Buck Lanier is being honored at the Country Music Awards next month. Lifetime achievement. It's at the Ryman. Televised. Derek's supposed to introduce him. They've been playing up the father-son mentorship angle in the press." I read it in the Tennessean. Moose and I stared at her. "How do you know that?" I asked. She shrugged. "I read. You should try it." She leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "Harlan, you don't just want to win a lawsuit. You want to humiliate them. You want the whole world to see what they did. The CMAs are your stage. Nationwide broadcast. Industry elite. 2,000 people in the audience." She tapped the contract. "And you've got the smoking gun." The plan started forming in my head like a storm gathering. We'd need to get into the Ryman. We'd need access to their AV system. We'd need to swap whatever tribute video they had planned with Dottie's reel and the proof of their crimes. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of thing a stubborn old Navy man would do. "We've got a month," I said. "Moose, you still know how to bypass old theater electronics?" Moose grinned, his teeth yellow but solid. "I can hotwire anything with a plug. Give me a couple weeks to study the Ryman setup." "Pearl, can you get us into that ceremony?" She smiled the smile of a woman who'd been collecting favors for 40 years. "My niece's husband works for the production company that runs the CMAs. He owes me. Big time." She stubbed out her cigarette. "I'll get you a backstage pass." I looked at my 2 oldest friends, sitting in a diner booth in the middle of nowhere, planning a heist on the biggest night in country music. Dottie's words echoed in my head, "Go raise some hell." "All right," I said. "Here's what we're gonna do." The plan started forming in my head like a storm gathering. Moose leaned back in his chair, the old wood groaning under his weight. "The Ryman. You want to break into the Ryman Auditorium and hijack the Country Music Awards. Harlan, that's either the dumbest idea I've ever heard or the greatest. Can't it be both?" Pearl said, refilling our coffee cups. She had that look in her eye, the one that meant she was already 10 steps ahead of everyone else. "Here's what you need to understand about the CMAs. The Lifetime Achievement Tribute is always a video package first. Old photos, interview clips, the honoree crying on stage. It runs on a loop before Buck walks out. If we can swap that video, then 2,000 people in the audience and every television viewer in America watches Dottie tell the truth instead," I finished. "Buck Lanier's big night becomes his execution." Moose whistled low. "You don't mess around, do you?" I had 6 months of grief and about 30 years of lies to process. "I'm done processing." Pearl pulled out a pen and started sketching on a napkin. "The Ryman has an old-school AV booth in the balcony. They've modernized some of it, but the backbone is the same system they've used for decades. My niece's husband, his name's Tommy, he works as a stagehand. He told me once that the tribute videos are loaded onto a dedicated player in the booth. It's not networked. It's not fancy. It's a VHS deck connected to the main screen. A VHS deck, I repeated. Like it's 1985. Country music doesn't like change, Harlan. You know that. She drew a rough square on the napkin. The booth. Tommy says the tech who runs it takes a smoke break about 10 minutes before the Lifetime Achievement segment. Says it's tradition. The guy's been doing it for 20 years. Moose and I exchanged a look. A 10-minute window. An unlocked booth. A VHS deck. That's our opening, Moose said. We get in, swap the tape, and get out before anyone notices. Then we just sit back and watch the fireworks. It's not that simple, Pearl said. We need passes to get backstage. We need to know the layout. We need to know security patrols. And we need a VHS copy of Dottie's film, because that projector reel won't fit in a VCR. I hadn't thought of that. Dottie's confession was on 35mm film. A giant reel that only worked in a projector made before most people in that audience were born. Moose, I said. You told me once you knew a guy who transferred old films to video. For the Historical Society or something. Moose rubbed his chin. Eddie Kowalski. Runs a little video shop in Murfreesboro. Weird guy, collects vintage porn and old cartoons, but he knows his stuff. He could transfer a film reel to VHS in his sleep. Then that's step one. I folded Dottie's contract and tucked it back in my jacket. Pearl, you work on those passes. Moose, you talk to Eddie about the transfer. I'm going to that bank first thing tomorrow morning and getting into the safe deposit box. Dottie said the DNA results were in there, along with the real will. Pearl reached across the table and grabbed my wrist. Her grip was strong for a woman her age. Harlan, you need to understand something. Once we do this, there's no going back. Buck Lanier has lawyers. Derek has money. They will fight back. Let them, I said. I've got something they don't. What's that? The truth. And a dead woman who deserves justice. Pearl let go of my wrist and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a woman who'd been underestimated her whole life and had made peace with it. I'll make some calls tonight. You two get some sleep. Tomorrow, we go to war. I spent that night in the projection booth, curled up on the floor with my jacket for a pillow. It wasn't comfortable, but it was mine. The first thing I'd owned free and clear since Derek threw me out. I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind whistle through the holes in the screen tower, and I talked to Dottie. I found your secret, sweetheart, I whispered. I found it, and I'm going to use it. I hope you're not mad at me for what I'm about to do. But those two have been getting away with it for too long. Someone's gotta hold them accountable. Might as well be your stubborn old trucker. The wind picked up outside, rattling the loose board somewhere in the concession stand. It almost sounded like an answer. Morning came hard and fast. I woke up stiff and sore, every joint reminding me that I was 68 and had slept on concrete. But my mind was sharper than it had been in months. Purpose does that. Grief is a fog, but revenge is a compass. I drove into Lynchburg and found the First Tennessee Bank, a squat brick building on the town square, the kind of place where the tellers know everyone's name and the manager still wears suspenders. The safe deposit box key felt heavy in my pocket. Dottie had taped it inside the film canister, probably years ago, waiting for me to find it. The bank manager, a round man named Henderson, led me to the vault without asking too many questions. Small towns are good that way. People mind their business, especially when you look like you haven't slept in a week. The box was number 147, a long metal drawer in a wall of identical drawers. I slid the key in, turned it, and pulled. Inside was exactly what Dottie promised. A DNA test report from a lab in Nashville, dated 1995. A copy of the original will, signed and notarized, leaving everything to me, the house, the accounts, the land. And a second VHS tape, labeled in Dottie's handwriting, for the world. Play it loud. She'd had the DNA test done 3 years before she got sick. She'd known for years that Derek wasn't my blood. She'd carried that secret, protected me from it, probably to keep our family together. And Derek had used it against her anyway. I sat in the bank vault for a long time, holding that tape. Dottie had made 2 recordings. One for me, private and personal, hidden in the drive-in. And one for the world, tucked away in a bank vault, waiting for the right moment. She'd planned this. Even from the grave, my wife was fighting. I closed the box, thanked Henderson, and walked out into the morning sun with everything I needed to destroy 2 men. Pearl was waiting for me at the diner, a manila envelope in front of her. "Passes," she said, sliding it across the counter. 3 of them. Backstage access for the CMAs. Tommy came through. I opened the envelope. 3 laminated badges with the CMA logo and the words, "Production Crew," printed in bold letters. Underneath each one was a name, Harlan Brewer. Moses Delaney. Pearl Henderson. "How did you get them so fast?" Pearl lit a cigarette. "Tommy owes me about 15 years of favors. His marriage was a mess back in '85, and I talked his wife out of leaving him. He's been trying to pay me back ever since." She blew smoke toward the ceiling. "Besides, I told him the truth. Well, most of it. I said we were working on a surprise tribute for Buck Lanier's Lifetime Achievement Award. Something personal. He ate it up. Pearl, you're a damn genius." "I know." She pointed at the passes. "The ceremony is in 3 weeks. That gives us time to scout the Ryman, test the equipment, and make sure everything goes smooth." Moose walked in just then, carrying a cardboard box. "Eddie came through," he announced, setting the box on the counter. "Transferred the whole reel to VHS. Cleaned up the audio, too. Said it was the best quality film stock he'd seen from that era. Whatever studio Buck used back in 1970, they didn't skimp on equipment." He pulled out a black VHS tape with a handwritten label. I took it carefully, like it was made of glass. This was it. The weapon. The smoking gun. My wife's voice, her face, her truth, ready to be broadcast to millions. "We need to test it," I said. "Make sure it plays right. Make sure there aren't any glitches." Pearl went to the back room and came back with an old TV/VCR combo, the kind with a built-in screen that weighed about 40 pounds. She set it on the counter, plugged it in, and slid the tape into the slot. The screen flickered. Then Dottie appeared. Young. Beautiful. Fierce. "My name is Dorothy Brewer," she said, her voice clear and steady. "And this is my story. Buck Lanier stole my song. He stole my youth. And he's been lying to the world for 30 years. Everything you're about to see is true. I've got the documents to prove it." The tape cut to images of the contract, the DNA test, the letters. Dottie's voice narrated over everything, calm but unflinching. She told the whole story, the Bluebird Cafe, the recording studio, the threats, the pregnancy, the years of silence. She named names. She showed proof. And at the end, she picked up her guitar and sang Tennessee Midnight the way it was meant to be sung. Slow. Heartbreaking. Real. When the tape ended, none of us spoke for a full minute. Pearl was crying. Moose was staring at the blank screen with his jaw clenched. I just stood there, my hand resting on the TV, like I could touch her through the glass. "Harlan," Pearl finally said, wiping her eyes. "That's going to bring the house down." "Good," I said. "That's exactly what I want." The next 3 weeks were a blur of preparation. Moose drove to Nashville 3 times to study the Ryman's backstage layout. He memorized every hallway, every exit, every security camera. He found the AV booth exactly where Pearl said it would be, a small room on the balcony level, accessible through a service corridor that hardly anyone used. He even timed the security patrols. 5-minute rotations. Predictable. Pearl worked on logistics. She arranged for us to stay at a motel near the Ryman the night before the ceremony. She prepped cover stories in case anyone asked questions. She even got her hands on the official program for the CMAs, which confirmed exactly what we needed. Buck Lanier's Lifetime Achievement Tribute was scheduled for 9:15 p.m., right after the Best New Artist Award. 15 minutes. Prime time. And I prepared myself. Not physically, I'm too old for that. But mentally. I watched Dottie's tape every night, memorizing every word, every chord, every pause. I imagined the look on Buck Lanier's face when the video started playing. I imagined Derek's smirk crumbling. I imagined justice, finally, after 30 years of silence. The night before the ceremony, I drove out to the drive-in one last time. The sun was setting, and the old screen tower cast a long shadow across the weeds. I stood in the middle of the empty field, where hundreds of cars used to park on summer nights, and I talked to my wife. "We're doing it tomorrow, Dot," I said. "Everything you wanted. The whole world's going to know the truth. I just wish you could be here to see it." A breeze picked up, rustling the weeds. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. It wasn't an answer, not really. But it felt like one. I got back in my truck and drove to Nashville. Moose and Pearl were already at the motel, a cheap place off Broadway with flickering neon and thin walls. We spent the evening reviewing the plan one last time. "Here's the timeline," Pearl said, spreading a hand-drawn map of the Ryman on the bed. "We arrive at 7 p.m. The ceremony starts at 8. At 9, Tommy lets us in through the stage door on the north side. He's arranged for the security guard to be on break at that exact time. We go straight to the service corridor. Moose, you'll be watching the hallway. If anyone comes, you stall them." "Got it," Moose said. "I'll be in the AV booth," I said. "The tech takes his smoke break at 9:05. That gives me exactly 10 minutes to swap the tapes and get out." "And if the tech comes back early?" Moose asked. "Then I improvise." Pearl pulled out a small toolkit from her bag. "I packed this for you. Screwdrivers, wire cutters, duct tape. Just in case the VCR is locked down or something goes wrong." I took the toolkit. It was heavy, solid. The kind of thing a real production crew member would carry. "You think of everything, Pearl. One of us has to." She looked at me, her expression softening. "Harlan, whatever happens tomorrow night, win or lose, Dottie would be proud of you. You know that, right?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Then I turned to Moose. "You remember that time in Da Nang, when we had to sneak past those guards to get to the radio tower?" Moose grinned. "You got us lost for 2 hours, and we ended up in the mess hall instead. This is going to be easier than that. It better be. I'm too old for jungle crawling." We laughed, and for a moment, the tension broke. 3 old friends, sitting in a cheap motel room, about to pull off the most satisfying act of sabotage in country music history. The next morning, I woke before dawn. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I put on the only suit I owned, a dark blue blazer I'd bought for Dottie's funeral, and clipped the production crew badge to my lapel. Moose wore his old navy dress uniform, the one he'd been threatening to fit into for 20 years. Pearl wore a simple black dress, elegant and understated, with her badge pinned to her purse strap. We looked like exactly what we were pretending to be. A production crew. Nobody special. Nobody worth a second glance. The Ryman Auditorium rises up from downtown Nashville like a cathedral. Stained glass windows. Rows of wooden pews instead of seats. A stage that's held Hank Williams and Patsy Cline and Johnny Cash. And tonight, Buck Lanier was going to stand on that stage and accept the highest honor country music can give. At least, that's what he thought. We arrived at 7 p.m. sharp. The street outside was packed with limousines and television trucks. Famous faces everywhere, singers, producers, industry bigwigs. Nobody looked at us twice. 3 gray-haired people with production badges? We were invisible. Tommy met us at the stage door, just like Pearl promised. He was a nervous little man with a clipboard and a headset. "Aunt Pearl," he whispered, ushering us inside. "I got you in, but please don't tell me what this is really about. I don't want to know." "You don't," Pearl said, patting his cheek. "Just get us to the service corridor." Tommy led us through a maze of backstage hallways, past dressing rooms, past equipment cases, past stagehands running cables. The Ryman's backstage is cramped and chaotic, nothing like the polished facade the audience sees. Perfect for our purposes. Nobody noticed 3 more faces in the crowd. The service corridor was exactly where Moose said it would be. A narrow staircase leading up to the balcony level. Dim lighting. No cameras. We climbed single file, our footsteps echoing on the old wood. At the top of the stairs was a small door marked AV, authorized personnel only. Moose positioned himself next to it, leaning against the wall like he belonged there. "I've got the hallway. You two do what you need to do." Pearl squeezed my arm. "I'll be at the bottom of the stairs. If anything goes wrong, I'll create a diversion." She handed me the VHS tape, Dottie's Truth in a black plastic shell. "Make her proud, Harlan." I took the tape. It felt heavier than it should have. "I will." I checked my watch. 9:04 p.m. 1 minute until the AV tech's smoke break. Right on schedule, the door opened and a middle-aged man in a black polo shirt stepped out, already reaching for his cigarettes. He barely glanced at me. "You the replacement?" "Yep," I said, not missing a beat. "Go ahead. I've got it covered." "Finally," he muttered. "They've been running me ragged all night. Everything's queued up for the Lanier tribute. Just don't touch anything else. Wouldn't dream of it." He disappeared down the stairs, and I slipped through the door before it swung shut. The AV booth was small and cluttered. Monitors lined one wall, showing different camera feeds from the main stage. A mixing board covered with sliders and buttons. And in the corner, on a rolling cart, was exactly what Pearl had promised, a VHS deck connected to the main video system. The tribute tape was already loaded, waiting for its cue. I had 10 minutes. Maybe less. I pulled out Dottie's tape and swapped it with the one in the deck. The labels were almost identical, I'd made sure of that. Anyone glancing at the machine wouldn't notice the difference. I checked the connections twice. Rewound the tape to the beginning. Tested the play button. Everything worked. Then I sat down in the tech's chair, put on his headset, and waited. Through the monitors, I could see the ceremony unfolding on stage. Some young singer I didn't recognize was accepting an award, crying and thanking Jesus. The audience applauded politely. The host made a joke. More applause. And then the announcer's voice crackled through my headset. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's time for the moment we've all been waiting for. The Country Music Association is proud to present the Lifetime Achievement Award to a true legend. A man whose music has touched millions. Please welcome to the stage, to introduce our honoree, Mr. Derek Vance. Derek walked on stage, and I felt my blood pressure spike. He looked exactly like he had in the lawyer's office, smug, polished, wearing a suit that cost more than my truck. The audience clapped politely. They had no idea who he was, but he acted like they should. Thank you, Derek said, adjusting the microphone. It's my incredible honor to introduce a man who needs no introduction. A man whose music shaped the soundtrack of our lives. A man I'm proud to call. He paused for dramatic effect. My mentor and my friend. The audience applauded again. I gripped the armrest of my chair. But before we bring him out, Derek continued, we have a special video tribute celebrating his extraordinary career. Please, roll the tape. This was it. The moment. I hit play. The giant screen behind Derek flickered to life. The audience settled into their seats, expecting a montage of Buck Lanier's greatest hits. Old concert footage. Celebrity interviews. The usual. Instead, my wife's face appeared. Young. Radiant. Staring directly into the camera with fire in her eyes. My name is Dorothy Brewer, she said, her voice filling the Ryman. And this is my story. A confused murmur rippled through the audience. Derek froze. His head whipped toward the screen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. Buck Lanier stole my song, Dottie continued. He stole my youth. And he's been lying to the world for 30 years. The audience went dead silent. Someone backstage shouted something I couldn't make out. On the monitors, I could see Derek gesturing frantically to the wings, trying to get someone to stop the tape. But nobody moved. Nobody knew what was happening. Dottie told her story. The Bluebird Cafe. The recording studio. The threats. The pregnancy. Each detail landed like a hammer blow. The screen showed the contract. The DNA test. The letters. Irrefutable proof, one piece after another. She was 19 years old, Dottie's voice said. And he destroyed her. But she didn't stay destroyed. She built a life. She found a good man. And she kept this evidence, hoping that someday, someone would be brave enough to use it. I could see Derek now, his face pale as milk. He'd stopped gesturing. He was just standing there, frozen, watching his entire life unravel in front of 2,000 people. Then Buck Lanier himself walked on stage. He'd obviously been waiting in the wings, ready for his big entrance, and someone had pushed him out early. He stumbled into the spotlight, a silver-haired man in a rhinestone jacket, his face a mask of confusion and mounting horror. He looked at the screen. He looked at Derek. He looked at the audience. What is this? He barked into the microphone. Turn it off. Somebody turn it off. But nobody did. Because now Dottie was singing. Her voice, pure and aching, filled the Ryman. Tennessee Midnight, the way it was meant to be sung. Not Buck Lanier's bombastic version. The real one. A woman's song about love and loss and stolen dreams. By the time she finished, there were people in the audience crying. I could see it on the monitors, hardened country music veterans, artists who'd been in the business for decades, wiping their eyes. The screen went black. The silence was deafening. Then I stood up. I took off the headset. I walked out of the AV booth, down the service stairs, through the backstage corridor, and onto the stage. Nobody stopped me. The security guards were too stunned. The producers were too panicked. And Tommy, God bless him, was holding the stage door open. I walked into the spotlight. 2,000 people stared at me. Television cameras tracked my every move. Derek's face went from pale to purple. Buck Lanier looked like he'd seen a ghost. I walked to the microphone stand, gently moved Derek aside, and leaned into the mic. "Evening, folks," I said. "My name's Harlan Brewer. That woman on the screen was my wife, Dottie. And I've got a few things to say." The audience was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the moon. "I raised that boy right there," I said, pointing at Derek. "Taught him to ride a bike. Taught him to drive. Stayed up nights worrying about him. And when my wife was dying, he brought lawyers to her hospital room and threatened her until she signed everything over to him." Derek opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. "And this gentleman," I continued, turning to Buck Lanier, "stole a 19-year-old girl's song and built an empire on it. Then he threatened to destroy her if she ever told the truth. He's been lying to all of you for 30 years. Every award. Every dollar. Every standing ovation. Built on a lie." Buck Lanier's face was ashen. The rhinestones on his jacket glittered under the stage lights, but the man inside them had shrunk to nothing. "I've got the original contract," I said, pulling it from my jacket and holding it up. "I've got the DNA test proving who Derek's real father is. I've got letters, recordings, and a notarized will. It's all been filed with a lawyer. And copies have been sent to every newsroom in Nashville." I turned to face the audience directly. The cameras. The millions watching at home. My wife was the best woman I ever knew. She carried these secrets for 30 years to protect her family. And these two men rewarded her by terrorizing her on her deathbed. I looked at Derek, then at Buck. She asked me to raise some hell. So here I am. I stepped back from the microphone. The silence stretched for one heartbeat. 2. Then the audience erupted. Not in boos, in applause. A standing ovation, but not for Buck Lanier. For Dottie. For the truth. For a 68-year-old trucker who just burned down 2 empires in 15 minutes. Buck Lanier stumbled backward and nearly fell off the stage. Someone caught him. It wasn't gentle. Derek just stood there, his face blank, his perfect world collapsing around him. The television camera zoomed in on both of them, capturing every humiliating second for the world to see. I walked off stage. Pearl and Moose were waiting in the wings, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. "You did it," Pearl said, grabbing my arm. "You actually did it." Moose clapped me on the back hard enough to stagger me. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And I once saw a man wrestle an alligator." The chaos after I walked off that stage was something to behold. Pearl, Moose, and I slipped out the stage door before anyone could stop us, but we could hear the commotion inside. Shouting. Applause. Someone had pulled the fire alarm, whether by accident or on purpose, I still don't know. The Ryman emptied into the Nashville streets, celebrities and executives and regular folks all mingling together in confusion, and in the middle of it all, 3 senior citizens in production crew badges melted into the crowd like ghosts. We didn't go back to the motel. Pearl insisted we celebrate properly, so we ended up at a honky-tonk on Broadway, the kind of place with peanut shells on the floor and a band that takes requests. Moose ordered 3 beers and a basket of fried pickles. Pearl kept laughing at nothing, the adrenaline still pumping through her veins. And I just sat there, my back against the wall, watching the band play some song I didn't recognize. "How do you feel?" Pearl asked me. I thought about it for a minute. Like I just finished a 30-year shift. Moose raised his beer. "To Dottie. The best songwriter Nashville never knew." We clinked bottles. The band launched into a Hank Williams cover, and the bar crowd sang along, and nobody in that honky-tonk had any idea that 3 tables over sat the man who just detonated the biggest scandal in country music history. The next morning, it was everywhere. The Tennessean ran the headline, "Lanier Scandal Rocks CMA," above a photo of Buck's horrified face. The national news picked it up by noon. By evening, Every talk show and radio station in America was playing Dottie's version of Tennessee Midnight and dissecting the story. The stolen song. The secret son. The deathbed will. It was a soap opera wrapped in a true crime wrapped in a country music tragedy, and the public couldn't get enough. The lawyers came fast. Buck Lanier's legal team filed an emergency motion to block the tape from being broadcast again, claiming it was illegally obtained. But Pearl's niece's husband Tommy had been smart. He'd made sure the Ryman's official recording system captured everything. The whole thing was on the CMA's own footage. You can't sue someone for broadcasting your reaction to the truth. Derek tried a different approach. 3 days after the CMAs, my phone rang. I was at the drive-in, patching a hole in the concession stand roof, when Pearl waved me down with the cordless. "It's him," she said, her face tight. I took the phone. "What do you want, Derek?" His voice was different. Smaller. The smugness was gone, replaced by something desperate and raw. "Pops. I want to talk. Can we meet? You called me an old man and told me to live with rats. Why would I want to meet with you?" Silence. Then, "Because you're the only father I ever had. And I know I messed up. I know I can't fix it. But I need you to understand why I did what I did." I should have hung up. Every instinct told me to. But somewhere deep in my chest, buried under all the anger, was 30 years of habit. This was the boy I'd raised. The boy who'd scraped his knee and run to me instead of Dottie. The boy who'd stood next to me at her funeral, dry-eyed and distant, while I fell apart. "The diner," I said. "Pearl's place. Tomorrow at noon. You get 10 minutes. He started to thank me, but I hung up before he could finish. Pearl was watching me with her arms crossed. "You're not actually going to forgive him, are you?" "I'm going to listen. There's a difference. You're a softer touch than I am, Harlan Brewer. Maybe. Or maybe I just want to see him squirm in person." Derek showed up right at noon, looking nothing like the polished executive who'd thrown me out of my own home. He wore jeans and a rumpled shirt. His hair was uncombed. His eyes had the hollow look of someone who hadn't slept in days. He slid into the booth across from me, and Pearl set a cup of coffee in front of him with significantly less warmth than she gives strangers. 10 minutes, she said, and walked away. Derek stared at his coffee for a long time before he spoke. "I found out about Buck when I was 35, he finally said. "I hired a private investigator to track down my biological father. When I found out it was Buck Lanier, I thought it was the best thing that ever happened to me. My real father was a legend. A superstar. And he wanted to know me. So you threw away the man who actually raised you." I was angry. He looked up, and for the first time, I saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. It was shame. "I was angry at you for not being my real father. Angry at Mom for lying to me. Angry at myself for caring. Buck made it easy. He said all the right things. He told me I deserved the life I'd been denied. He told me the drive-in land was sitting on a gold mine, and that if Mom wouldn't sell, she was standing in the way of my future. And you believed him. He was my father." Derek's voice cracked. I wanted to believe him. I sat back in the booth and looked at this man, this stranger who wore my son's face. "You terrorized your mother on her deathbed. You brought lawyers to her hospital room. You made her last weeks a living hell." Derek's face crumpled. I know what I did. And I'll never forgive myself for it." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "Buck told me it was the only way. He said if we didn't get the will changed before she died, you'd get everything and we'd lose the land forever. He made it sound reasonable. Like we were just protecting what was ours. Nothing about that land was yours. Or Buck's. It was Dottie's. She bought it with the little money she had left after that man destroyed her. I know that now. Derek pushed his coffee away, untouched. Buck's lawyers called me this morning. They're dropping me. They said I'm a liability. The record label is suing him for breach of contract. The Hall of Fame is reviewing his induction. And I've got nothing left. The Bellmead house is frozen. My company's board voted me out. I'm broke, Pops. I studied him for a long moment. The boy I'd raised was in there somewhere, buried under years of greed and resentment and Buck Lanier's poison. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He was a 42-year-old man who'd made his own choices. Bad ones. Cruel ones. Here's what's going to happen, I said. The original will has been filed with the court. The Bellmead house is mine again, along with everything else. I'm selling the house and putting the money into Dottie's foundation. The drive-in stays. The song royalties go to the songwriters fund. And you get nothing. Derek nodded slowly, like he'd expected exactly this. I understand. But. I leaned forward, my elbows on the table. If you want to start over, I won't stop you. Get a job. See a therapist. Figure out who you are without Buck Lanier whispering in your ear. That's the only second chance you're getting, and I'm not the one giving it to you. You have to earn it yourself. Derek stared at me for a long time. Then he stood up, pulled a $20 bill from his pocket, and set it on the table. For the coffee, he said. I know it's not enough. It'll never be enough. But it's a start. He walked out of the diner without looking back. I watched him go, and I felt something unexpected. It wasn't forgiveness. I wasn't ready for that, and maybe I never would be. But it was something close to closure. The chapter was finished. Whatever Derek did with the rest of his story was up to him now. Pearl appeared next to the booth. 10 minutes, she said. You gave him exactly 10 minutes. I'm a man of my word. She slid into the seat across from me. You handled that better than I would have. Don't give me too much credit. I still sued him into the ground. Pearl laughed, loud and genuine, the kind of laugh that fills up a room. Harlan Brewer, you are a complicated man. I'm a simple man with a complicated wife. Was a complicated wife. I corrected myself. She's the one who set all this in motion. I just followed her instructions. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Reporters camped out at the drive-in for a while, hoping for interviews. I gave a few, mostly to local papers, and always said the same thing: this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice. It was about a woman whose voice had been stolen, finally getting the chance to sing. The legal settlement came through faster than anyone expected. Buck Lanier, facing a mountain of lawsuits and public disgrace, agreed to a deal. The royalties from Tennessee Midnight, Past and Future, would go to Dottie's estate. The song would be recredited to Dorothy Brewer. And Buck would issue a public apology, which he did through a press release so carefully worded by lawyers that it barely qualified as human speech. The money was staggering. I'd never seen that many zeros in my life. 30 years of royalties on a song that had been covered by dozens of artists, played in movies and commercials and stadiums. It was enough to change lives. So that's exactly what I did with it. The Dorothy Brewer Songwriters Fund launched that spring. Pearl handled the paperwork. Moose, who turned out to be surprisingly good with numbers, handled the finances. And I handled the mission, finding young songwriters, especially women from small towns, who just needed someone to believe in them. We gave grants. We paid for studio time. We connected them with honest managers and lawyers who wouldn't steal their work. Every year, on Dottie's birthday, we hold a showcase at the drive-in. The grant recipients come and perform their songs, and the whole town turns out with lawn chairs and coolers. The screen tower still has that hole in it, but we strung up lights around it, and at night it looks almost magical. Moose fires up the grill. Pearl runs the snack bar. And I sit in my old lawn chair, right in the center of the field, and listen to young voices singing original songs under the Tennessee stars. The first showcase, a young woman from Kentucky named Marilee got up with her guitar. She couldn't have been more than 22. She had the same look Dottie had in that old film, bright and terrified and fierce all at once. She played a song she'd written about her grandmother, and when she finished, the whole field was silent for about 3 seconds before erupting in applause. Afterward, Marilee found me by the snack bar. "Mr. Brewer," she said, "I just want to thank you. This grant changed my life." "Call me Pops," I said. "And don't thank me. Thank my wife. She's the one who made all this possible." Marilee smiled. "I wrote a song about her. About Dottie. Do you want to hear it?" She played it right there, under the string lights, with the screen tower looming behind her. It was called "The Song She Never Got to Sing." By the second verse, I was crying. By the bridge, Pearl was crying. By the end, even Moose was pretending he had something in his eye. That's what Dottie left behind. Not just a contract and a secret and a revenge plot. She left a legacy. She left a way for other women to have the chance she never got. The drive-in became more than a movie theater. It became a community center. We showed movies on weekends, but during the week, we hosted songwriting workshops and open mic nights and potluck dinners. Pearl started a book club that met in the concession stand. Moose taught a basic car repair class in the parking lot. And somehow, without anyone planning it, the Starlight became the heart of Lynchburg again. Banjo the dog showed up about a month after the CMAs. He was a scruffy mutt with one ear that flopped down and a tail that never stopped wagging. I found him curled up under the marquee one morning, skinny and muddy and looking at me like he'd just found exactly where he belonged. I named him Banjo because the first time I played Dottie's tape, he perked up his ears during the guitar parts and howled along. He's been with me ever since. Sleeps on the foot of my bed. Rides shotgun in the truck. Barks at squirrels with the kind of enthusiasm you usually only see in dogs half his age. Pearl and I, well, I don't know what to call what we have. Companionship, I guess. She still runs the diner, and I still run the drive-in, but we have dinner together most nights and argue about politics and take turns walking Banjo. She's the sharpest woman I've ever known, and she makes me laugh, and she doesn't let me feel sorry for myself. Dottie would have liked her. They were friends, after all. "Are you happy?" Pearl asked me one night. We were sitting on the hood of my truck, watching the credits roll on The Searchers. The last cars were pulling out of the lot, their taillights winking through the darkness. I thought about the question. Happy. It was a word I hadn't used in a long time. For months after Dottie died, I didn't think I'd ever be happy again. And then the will. And then the drive-in. And then the secret and the film and the CMAs and everything that came after. It had been a long, strange road from grief to where I was now. "I'm at peace," I finally said. "That's better than happy. Happy comes and goes. Peace stays." Pearl leaned her head against my shoulder. "That's the most philosophical thing I've ever heard you say. Don't get used to it. I'm still a dumb trucker at heart." "You were never a dumb trucker, Harlan. Dottie knew that. I know that. You're the smartest stubborn old man I've ever met." I put my arm around her, and we sat there in the quiet, watching the stars come out over the screen tower. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and Banjo lifted his head and howled back. A year passed. Then 2. The Dorothy Brewer Songwriters Fund grew bigger than I ever imagined. We partnered with the Bluebird Cafe, the same place where Dottie had played all those years ago, to host a monthly showcase. We funded a recording studio in East Nashville that specialized in working with first-time artists. We even started a small scholarship at Belmont University's music program. Every time I went to one of the events, I brought Dottie's photo with me. The one in the cheap brass frame from Albuquerque. I'd set it on the table or the counter or the edge of the stage, wherever I was, so she could see what her legacy had become. People still recognized me sometimes. I'd be at a gas station or a hardware store, and someone would do a double take. "Hey, aren't you that guy? The one who took down Buck Lanier at the CMAs?" And I'd nod and shake their hand and maybe tell them a little piece of the story. But I never told the whole thing. The whole thing was too big, too personal, too sacred to share with strangers. The whole thing belonged to me, and to Pearl, and to Moose, and to Dottie. And to anyone who'd ever had a dream stolen from them and wondered if it was worth fighting to get it back. 3 years after the CMAs, Buck Lanier died. Heart attack, the papers said. He was 73. Alone in his mansion, with most of his fortune gone to legal fees and settlements. I read the obituary in the Tennessean while eating breakfast at Pearl's counter. It was short. A paragraph about his career, a mention of the scandal, and then the standard list of survivors. Derek's name wasn't in it. I folded the paper and set it aside. Pearl was watching me from behind the counter. "How do you feel?" I thought about it. "Nothing," I said. "I feel nothing. He took enough from me when he was alive. I'm not letting him take anything else now that he's dead." Pearl nodded. "That's healthy. I've been going to therapy. That's what my therapist says too." Pearl almost dropped her coffee pot. "You? Therapy? Turns out processing 30 years of secrets and a public revenge campaign takes a toll." "Who knew?" I shrugged. "Therapy helps. You should try it. I process my feelings by running a diner and bossing you around. It works fine." I laughed and went back to my eggs. Derek didn't come to the funeral. I don't know if he was even invited. The last I heard, he was living in Texas, working at a small software company, trying to rebuild his life from scratch. He sent me a letter once, a year after our meeting at the diner. It was short. "I'm in therapy too," it said. "I'm trying to be better. I know I can't undo what I did. But I want you to know that when people ask me about my father, I tell them about you. Not Buck. You. Thanks for giving me a second chance. I'm trying to deserve it." I wrote back a one-line response, "Keep trying." That was the last I heard from him. Maybe someday he'll show up at the drive-in, older and wiser and ready to make amends. Maybe he won't. Either way, it's out of my hands now. I did what Dottie asked. I raised some hell. And now I'm living the quiet life she always wanted for me. Tonight, the drive-in is showing The Quiet Man, the old John Wayne movie where he plays an Irish-American boxer who just wants to live in peace. Moose is running the projector. Pearl is at the snack bar, arguing with a teenager about the proper way to butter popcorn. Banjo is asleep under my lawn chair. And I'm sitting in the middle of the field, watching the Duke punch his way toward a happy ending, thinking about a woman in a yellow sundress who sang her heart out in a recording studio 30 years ago and set all of this in motion. On the screen, John Wayne kisses Maureen O'Hara, and the music swells, and the credits roll. The cars start their engines, headlights sweeping across the field. Families fold up their lawn chairs. Kids wave at me as they leave. And I sit there in the dark, the last one to go, as always. I pull Dottie's photo from my pocket. The frame is tarnished now, the glass slightly cracked from being carried around so much. But the picture inside is still bright. Dottie, 30 years younger, squinting into the desert sun, laughing at something I said. "We did it, sweetheart," I whisper. "We raised some hell." And somewhere, somehow, I swear I hear her laughing.